Hello and welcome to the German Pronunciation Masterclass. My name is Ingo Deppner and I'm a professional German teacher with more than 15 years experience. Imagine the following scenario. You're at a social event, talking to Germans in German, telling stories, chatting, enjoying yourself, until it's time to go home. On the way back to your place, you feel like something was different this time, and then it hits you. The whole time, nobody asked you where you're from. And why is that? Well, nobody realized that German is not your native language, because you sounded just like one of them. And this course will help you get there. First of all, you will learn the secrets of German pronunciation. And what I mean is that the spoken language is affected by reductions and simplifications that you need to know if you want to sound real and not like a textbook. Then we'll take a closer look at the consonants and vowels, and you'll learn two things: how to pronounce them correctly and how to get rid of mistakes that many learners make but are not aware of, and therefore cause misunderstandings and frustration. And finally, you'll get to know some German tongue twisters that will not only help you strengthen and stretch the muscles involved in speech, but also serve as an additional tool to help you identify sounds that are difficult for you, so that you can focus on them and perfect your pronunciation. Of course, you will have plenty of opportunities to apply what you're learning by doing numerous pronunciation exercises. And now I invite you to jump right into your first lesson, and in less time than you expect, you will speak German like a native. In this lesson, I'd like to talk about the German consonant R, which many students say is one of the most difficult sounds to master. But I have a surprise for you. In most cases, the German R does not sound like a consonant, but like a vowel. More precisely, it sounds like the schwa sound. And in English, you can find this sound in the words about and freedom, or in the filler word when you're thinking. You know, the R is only pronounced as a consonant when it comes before a vowel. For example, in the words Brot, Reis, Grau, Grün. And there is a separate lesson on how to pronounce that R correctly. In all other situations, the R is pronounced like a short and this phenomenon is called the German vocalic R, and it's not difficult to pronounce. Let's have a look at an example. Bier. We don't say Bier, it's also not Bier, and Bier is also wrong. The correct pronunciation is Bier. It sounds like Bier. Let's try some other examples, and you'll see that all the R's in these sentences are pronounced like Feel free to repeat after me. Er hört gerne Musik. Er hört gerne Musik. Wir lernen Deutsch. Wir lernen Deutsch. Ihr wohnt hier. Ihr wohnt hier. Der Hund ist ein Tier. Der Hund ist ein Tier. This also happens in the combination ER, for example in prefixes that are not stressed, such as f, z, or where you don't hear the R at all. There's only the sound. And by the way, yes, this is a Z. The design of the font is not very clear here. Repeat after me. Verstehen. Verstehen Sie mich? You don't say verstehen, but vergessen. Ich habe mein Handy vergessen. Zerbrechen. Das Glas ist zerbrochen. Erzählen. Kannst du eine Geschichte erzählen? And the same sound also appears when er is an unstressed suffix. Repeat after me. Zucker. Gibst du mir den Zucker? Vater. Wo ist dein Vater? Schwester. Meine Schwester wohnt in Berlin. Wasser. Ich möchte ein Glas Wasser. Many German names also end in er. Some examples are Müller, Steiner, Hübner, and also my last name, Deppner. Okay, the last thing I'd like to mention is that this sound only exists in the letter combination er. If there is only an e and it's not stressed, you pronounce it like the e in get. Let's compare some word pairs for making the distinction between and Repeat after me. Wette, Wetter. Meine, meiner. Fliege, Flieger. Bitte, bitter. Did you hear the difference? The sounds are similar, but they need to be pronounced differently to avoid misunderstandings. Alright, here's a summary of what we've just learned. The German R is pronounced as a consonant only when it comes before a vowel. Preis, Rot, Grün. In all other cases, it sounds like a schwa sound. Bier, mir, Wurst. An unstressed E sounds like and it's important to pronounce it differently to That's it. I'm sure that making this small change, and I mean pronouncing the German R as a vowel rather than a consonant, will generate big results and reduce your accent significantly. I'll see you in the next lesson. Hello and welcome back. One of the characteristics of the spoken language is the reduction of the E in unstressed syllables such as N or L, usually at the end of words. Let's have a look at an example. Guten Tag is actually pronounced Guten Tag. The E disappears. Guten Tag. Here are more examples, and please feel free to repeat after me. Sehen. Ich möchte den Film sehen. We don't say sehen, but sehen. Ich möchte den Film sehen. Heißen. Wie heißen Sie? Again, it's not heißen, but heißen. Wie heißen Sie? Wohnen. Wo wohnen Sie? Rauchen. Man darf hier nicht rauchen. Vogel. Der Vogel ist schön. We don't say Vogel, but Vogel. Der Vogel ist schön. Schlüssel. Wo sind meine Schlüssel? Ampel. Die Ampel war rot. Dunkel. Um 5 Uhr ist es dunkel. Now, when this reduction of the E happens in the N suffix, there are some consonant combinations that are difficult to pronounce. For example, in the word haben. According to what I said, it should sound like haben, but that's kind of difficult to pronounce, bn, so we don't do that. When there is ben at the end of a word, it's pronounced like bm. Haben becomes haben. Haben. Wir haben heute keine Zeit. Wir haben heute keine Zeit. Let's have a look at some additional examples. Repeat after me. Geben. Kannst du mir das Buch geben? Schreiben. Wir schreiben einen Brief. Lieben. Sie lieben Pizza. Okay, another consonant combination that is difficult to pronounce is G and N. For example, in morgen. When the E becomes silent, it would be something like morgen. But yeah, that's difficult, and therefore I'd like to introduce a new sound that you actually already know. It's the ng sound that we make when we say thing or bring. You cannot hear the G, and it's a nasal sound because the sound is expelled through the nose and not through the mouth. So gen becomes gn, and morgen sounds like morgen. Guten Morgen. Does that make sense? I know it might sound a bit strange, but you'll get used to it. And there will be another lesson about this ng sound later in the course. Let's practice. Sagen. Was soll ich sagen? Regen. Der Regen ist nass. Zeigen. Ich möchte dir etwas zeigen. Alright, so here is a summary of what we've just learned. In the spoken language, there happens a reduction of the E in the unstressed suffix N and also L. Guten becomes guten. Heißen becomes heißen, etc. Now, there are a couple of exceptions. Ben sounds like bm, for example in haben or geben. And gen sounds like gn, morgen, sagen. Alright, that's the silent E, and now you're one step closer to speaking German like a native. One of the typical features of German pronunciation is the so-called glottal stop. Let's have a look in the dictionary to get a definition of what it is. The interruption of the breath stream by a complete closure of the vocal cords. Okay, but how does that sound? I'll show you. First, I'll read this combination of vowels without a glottal stop, and then I'll read it a second time with a glottal stop. Let's start. I, e, e. You can hear that the second time I didn't connect the vowels, but every vowel is pronounced separately. And this is something that happens frequently when a word starts with a vowel in German. You do not connect the word with the previous one, like I, but it's cut off from the preceding one, like e. And this is different from English, because in English, and many other languages by the way, there is a strong tendency to connect words beginning with a vowel to the end of the previous word to form a smooth chain. An apple actually sounds like an apple. Okay, so let's have a look at some German examples. Das ist ein altes Auto. That's an old car. You can hear that I did not connect the vowels to the previous words. I didn't say das ist ein altes Auto, but all the vowels in red are pronounced separately. Another example. Mein Auto ist weiß. If you say mein Auto, I understand something like this. Mein Auto. And that doesn't have a meaning in German, so the lack of the glottal stop can definitely make it difficult to be understood correctly. Next. Ich esse ein Ei. I'm eating an egg. Again, I didn't connect the words. That would sound very strange for a native German speaker. Ich esse ein Ei, not ein Ei. And the fourth example? Ist im Augenblick in Istanbul. He's in Istanbul at the moment. Every word is a separate entity, and some people say that German sounds a bit harsh because of that, because it doesn't seem to flow smoothly. Ist im Augenblick in Istanbul. Alright, so that's when a vowel is at the beginning of the word. But a stressed syllable within a word may also be preceded by a glottal stop. For example, Ich war sehr beeindruckt. I was very impressed. You can clearly hear the pause between be and eindruckt. Beeindruckt. But of course, you don't write it like that. Other examples for words that have the glottal stop in the middle of the word are beachten. Bitte beachten Sie das. Please note that. Bitte beachten Sie das. Beenden. Sie hat das Gespräch beendet. She finished the conversation. Sie hat das Gespräch beendet. Beinhalten. Die Preise beinhalten Mehrwertsteuer. The prices include VAT, value added tax, or in America the equivalent is the sales tax. Die Preise beinhalten Mehrwertsteuer. Alright, so that was a lesson about the glottal stop, which is very characteristic of German pronunciation. Hello and welcome back. In this lesson, I'd like to talk about the letters PTK and BDG. They're called plosives, and they are similar to their counterparts in English, so that most English speakers shouldn't have problems with the pronunciation of these sounds. So, now you will ask, why did you call the lesson "What you see is not always what you get"? Well, the answer is that when the consonants B, D, and G appear at the end of a word, they harden to a P, T, and K. B sounds like a P, D sounds like a T, and G sounds like a K. Let's start with the letter B. Gelb, yellow. We don't say gelb, but gelb. The final B sounds like a P. Gelb. Repeat after me. Gelb. Gelb. Other examples are Lob. Lob. Do you hear the P sound at the end? Lob. Gab. For example, I gave. Ich gab. Here as well, the B sounds like a P. Gab. Taub. Repeat after me. Taub. Okay, let's proceed to the D. Geld, money. We don't say Geld, but Geld. The final D sounds like a T. Geld. Repeat after me. Geld. Geld. And here are some other examples. Hand. Do you hear the T at the end? Hand. Lied. Here as well, the D sounds like a T. Lied. Repeat after me. Lied. Wald. 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 And to complete the trio, we have the G sound, G, that if it appears at the end of a word, it is pronounced as a K, K. Hamburg, Hamburg. Flug, Flug. Do you hear the K sound at the end? Flug. Tag, Tag. Repeat after me. Tag. And we use this word a lot, right? For example, in Guten Tag, or the days of the week. Montag, Dienstag, Donnerstag, Freitag, Samstag, Sonntag. Always with a hard K sound at the end. Only Mittwoch is an exception. Zug. Zug. Here as well, the G sounds like a K. Zug. And last but not least, I'd like to mention that there are some initial plosives that are pronounced in German, but they're omitted in English. And if you're not aware of that, you could run into problems of communication. In English, initial P is silent before S, T, or N. Psychology. Initial K is silent before S and N. Knee. And initial G is silent before N. Net. In German, however, we do pronounce those letters at the beginning of words. Psychologie. Psychologie. Knie. Knie. Gnade. Gnade. Alright, so let's recap. When the German consonants B, D, and G appear at the end of a word, they harden to the sounds P, T, and K. These sounds are much easier to pronounce at the end of a word, and the reason is that we don't use our vocal cords to make them. And initial plosives are pronounced in some contexts in German in which they are omitted in English. Sometimes students ask me, when we talk in our lessons, I understand nearly everything you say in German, but when two Germans talk to each other, I have a really hard time understanding what they're saying. Why is that? And the answer is that when people speak fast, for example in a casual conversation with friends, their pronunciation is affected by certain reductions and simplifications that serve to reduce the muscular effort needed to speak. That happens in most languages. And some examples in English are going to becoming gonna and want to becoming wanna. Now, if you're not aware of this reduction, you will have a hard time understanding what is being said, even if you know the words going to and want to, right? So I've created this lesson with two main purposes in mind. First, to show you how we native German speakers really speak, so that you become aware of some characteristics and understand spoken German better. The second purpose is to enable you to speak like a native, especially at intermediate and advanced levels, and mostly in casual or informal situations. Let's start. Ich habe einen Hund. This is careful speech where the words are pronounced very clearly. When I speak, I probably say, Ich hab einen Hund. Ich hab einen Hund. And this sounds a bit different. Two things happened. I knocked off the final first person of habe, and there is a vowel reduction in the unstressed en suffix of einen. Ich hab einen Hund. An even more colloquial form is Ich hab nen Hund. Ich hab nen Hund. And that's my preferred one. Again, two things. the of habe disappears, and instead of einen, I said nen. That's very common. You can even read it in dialogues in books. So when you see nen, now you know that it's an abbreviation of einen. Ich hab nen Hund. Repeat after me. Ich hab nen Hund. Alright, next example. Wir haben ihn nicht gesehen. Wir haben ihn nicht gesehen. Very clear pronunciation, but usually we say, wir haben ihn nicht gesehen. And I mentioned this in one of the previous lessons. Haben sounds like haben, and the E in the unstressed suffix is not pronounced. When we speak fast, it would be something like this. Wir haben ihn nicht gesehen. Haben becomes ham, and the T of nicht disappears. Wir haben ihn nicht gesehen. Repeat after me. Wir haben ihn nicht gesehen. Some other words where the T at the end disappears when they're pronounced fast are jetzt, bist, and ist. Ich bin jetzt zu Hause sounds more like ich bin jetzt zu Hause. No T. Ich bin jetzt zu Hause. Wo bist du? Requires some effort. Therefore, most people say, wo bist du? Wo bist du? Er ist jetzt nicht hier. In this short sentence, you have 3 words where the final T drops. Ist, jetzt, and nicht. Er ist jetzt nicht hier. Repeat after me. Er ist jetzt nicht hier. In this context, I'd like to mention that nichts becomes nix in spoken language. Ich habe nichts gekauft actually sounds like ich hab nix gekauft. I repeat. Ich hab nix gekauft. Alright, another interesting thing is that in questions, the verb often merges with the second person pronoun du and gets the suffix ste. Here is an example. Kannst du sounds like kannste. Hast du morgen Zeit? Sounds like haste morgen Zeit. Repeat after me. Haste morgen Zeit? Now, the words mit dem often merge to mim. So let's see. Do you understand the following sentence? Fährst du mit'm Auto? Fährst du mit'm Auto? Exactly. It's fährst du mit dem Auto? Fährst du mit dem Auto? But it sounds like fährst du mit'm Auto. And another example. Ich gehe jetzt mit dem Hund spazieren. Kommst du mit? Sounds more like ich gehe jetzt mit dem Hund spazieren. Kommst du mit? Ich gehe jetzt mit dem Hund spazieren. Kommst du mit? And as haben is such an important verb, I'd like to add another colloquial form of it. Haben Sie can sound like haben Sie in some dialects. Haben Sie. In the streets of Berlin, you'll likely hear haben Sie einen Euro, which means haben Sie einen Euro? Haben Sie einen Euro? Alright, so those were some examples of how German native speakers really speak. It's important to be aware of these little or sometimes big changes that happen in fast, casual conversation. But you don't necessarily have to apply them to your own speaking if you don't feel comfortable yet. Use whatever feels natural to you and leave the rest for later on your language learning journey. A very common mistake is to confuse the length of a vowel when speaking German. The length of a vowel is extremely important because it doesn't only influence all the other sounds around it, but it can change the meaning of a word, and that leads to misunderstandings. For example, in many languages, it doesn't make a difference if you say I or I. But in German it does. And by the way, in English as well. I'll show you some examples so that you know what I'm talking about. Do you want to go to the beach? My biggest dream is to live in Germany. I have to change the bed sheet. I think you got the idea, right? So now you might ask, okay, but how do I know if I have to make a short or a long vowel sound? And the good news is there are some rules about this. Let's start with the long vowels. A German vowel is usually long if it's followed by a consonant and especially in front of what we call sharp S or SZ. Repeat after me. Bad, gut, Fuß, Weg. A German vowel is also long if it's written as a double letter. Meer, Zoo, Saal, Boot. What also makes a vowel long is if it's followed by an H. And in those cases, you do not pronounce the H, it's silent. Its only task is to make the vowel long. Bahn, Kuh, Lehrer, Sohn. And last but not least, the combination IE usually represents a long E sound. Lied, viel, Spiel, hier. Okay, and now let's have a look at the rules for short vowels. A German vowel is usually short if it's followed by two or more consonants, and especially double consonants such as PP, TT, and N, etc. Bett, Koffer, bunt, Sonne. German vowels are also short if followed by the consonant combination CK. Socke, Backen, Lecker, Zucker. Alright, so those are the rules. There are some exceptions, but if you know the rules, you're on the safe side in most cases. And when in doubt, I recommend the website forvo.com, which is a pronunciation dictionary where you can find many words pronounced by native speakers. This was the first part of the lecture. In the second part, I'll show you in detail how to pronounce the German short and long vowels in order to avoid misunderstandings. I'll see you there. Hello and welcome to the second part of the lecture on how to avoid misunderstandings resulting from the wrong length of a vowel. In this part, we'll have a closer look at the vowels A, E, I, O, and U. Let's start with the long A. You have to open your mouth to pronounce it correctly. And the sound also exists in English, especially in British English, in words such as ba or calm. Repeat after me. Glas, klar, sagen. And in contrast, we have the short a. It also exists in English and can be found in the words come or but. Ah. Repeat after me. Mann, Hand, Tasche. Here are some German words that show you how important a correct pronunciation is, because if you confuse the length of the vowel, the meaning changes, just like in leave and live. As always, feel free to repeat after me. Schal, Schall, kann, kann, Stadt, Stadt. We can take a moment to have a look at the rules that I mentioned before. On the left side, the long vowels, we have vowels followed by one consonant, followed by a silent H, and double vowels. And on the right side, the short vowels, we see the double consonants, which make the vowels short, or two consonants in a row. Okay, let's continue with the long E. And as you can see, we don't pronounce it I, but rather E, as the English letter E. This long E sound exists in English in the words be, see, team, or here. And here are some German words with the long E. Repeat after me. Liebe, Ihnen, Mine. And then there's the short I, which is also not difficult to pronounce because it's the same sound as in the English words bit, lip, hit. Some German words with the sound are Fisch, ist, bitte. And now I'll show you some words that have a different meaning only because of the different pronunciation of the vowel. As always, feel free to repeat after me. Bieten, bitten. Schief, Schiff. Stiel, still. Alright, the next vowel is the long E, which can be a little bit difficult to pronounce because it doesn't have a corresponding sound in English. And I noticed that many learners cannot distinguish between the long E and the long E that I was just talking about. They simply don't hear the difference because E doesn't exist in their native languages. So here are some words to show you that there actually is a difference. Idee, the German word for idea. Idee. First a long I, then a long E. Did you hear the difference? Idee. Now, if I don't pronounce the D in Idee, it sounds like IE. IE. And by the way, it's easier to pronounce the long E when you smile. E. The next example is mir and mehr. Mir, mehr. Mir has a long E and mehr has a long E. Mir, mehr. Mir, mehr. If you don't hear the difference, don't worry. It takes some practice, but eventually you'll be able to distinguish between E and E. Your brain simply has to get used to the different sounds. Let's practice and repeat after me. Beet, sehr, mehr, mehr. Alright, that was the long E, and its short equivalent is E. E. This one is easy because it does exist in many other languages and in English in the words get or set. Here are some German words with the short E. Geld, wenn, Bett. And as we did before, let's have a look at some words that change their meaning depending on the length of the vowel. Beten, betten. den, den, stehlen, stellen. All right, now we move on to the long O, O. It's very similar to the O in the English words more or door. A trick to make this sound is to whistle a very low tone, and that's exactly the shape of the mouth we have when we say O, O. And we use this sound in words such as Ofen, Boot, Wohnung. In contrast, there is the short O, which is easier to pronounce because it's similar to the English not or lot. O, O. Some German words with the short O are Tochter, konnte, Sonne. And now I'll show you some words that have a different meaning only because of the different pronunciation of the O sound. Sohle, Solle. Ofen, offen. Schoß, Schoss. And the last vowel I'd like to talk about in this lecture is the German vowel U. Let's start with the long version. U, U. It's like the sound in the English words boot, moon, or shoot. And be careful not to pronounce it U as in English. For example, the German word for music is Musik, but I hear a lot of learners who say Musik. And that's wrong, all right? It's Musik, like a cow. Mu, Musik. Other German words with a long U are Stuhl, Dusche, and Buch. Now let's have a look at the short version of the vowel. U, U, as in push, or book, or foot. In German, you can find this sound in the following words. Hund, Butter, Luft. And here are some word pairs to practice distinguishing between the long and the short German U vowels. Mus, Muss, Buße, Busse, Ruhm, Rum. Alright, so now you know how to pronounce the German vowels A, E, I, O, and U. You know the rules when to make a long or a short sound, so you're all set and able to avoid misunderstandings resulting from the wrong length of a vowel. The German CH is one of the main pronunciation problems for German learners, mostly because there are two different sounds that are represented by this letter combination. And usually these sounds, or at least one of them, don't exist in the learner's native language. In this lesson, I will explain how to pronounce these sounds, and I'll give you tips on how you can pronounce them as well. Let's start. First, there is the so-called back CH, which is pronounced in the back of the throat. And then there is the front CH, which is produced in the front of the mouth. Now you will ask, okay, but when do I make which sound? And the answer is, it depends on the letter that comes before the CH. If it's an A, O, or U, then you pronounce it in the back. If the CH is preceded by any other vowel, umlaut, or consonant, you pronounce it in the front. Now let's have a closer look at the back CH. The sound that is produced corresponds to the CH in Scottish English, for example, loch in Loch Ness. This CH can also be compared to the rough sound of an angry cat. Listen to the following words and feel free to repeat after me. Doch, doch, Buch, Buch, Nacht, Nacht, Bauch, Bauch, Kochen, Kochen. Alright, let's move on to the front CH. It's very similar to the sound made at the start of the English words huge, human, or the name Hugh. Another way of making this sound is saying the initial Y sound, as in yes, but say it very long, y, and then you try to say it without voice. Or in other words, you keep the same mouth position, but you whisper. Your vocal cords are not vibrating anymore. Y. And this is actually exactly what happens when we say the German word ich. Ich. Here are more examples with the front CH. Repeat after me. Becher, Becher, Licht, Licht, Kirche, Kirche, Stich, Stich, leicht, leicht. Okay, why don't we practice a little bit more? This time you will hear word pairs, the first word with a ch sound and the second word with a ch sound. Schlecht, Schlacht. Euch, auch. Küche, Kuchen. Töchter, Tochter. Reichen, Rauchen. Alright, now I'd like to mention two special scenarios. The first one is when CH is followed by an S, CHS, then it's pronounced like an X. Dachs, Fuchs, sechs, wechseln. And the second scenario is when there is an S in front of the CH and this combination belongs to the same syllable, it's pronounced like a sh. For example, in Schule, Mensch, Flasche, schön. Let's summarize. If the CH is preceded by A, O, or U, it sounds like an angry cat. If the CH is preceded by any other vowel, umlaut, or consonant, it sounds like the initial sound in huge or hue. or the voiceless h sound of the e in yes. CHS sounds like an X, for example in Fuchs. And SCH sounds like sh, for example in Schule. And finally, don't worry if your ch or h doesn't sound perfect yet. This is a process, and I like to compare pronunciation to training a muscle. Little by little, it will get better. You know, if you've never pronounced these sounds in your native language or other languages you speak, your mouth needs to get used to it. And it will. German has very few nasal sounds compared to French or Hindi, and in my opinion, NG is the most important one. I mentioned this sound in one of the previous lessons, and now I'd like to dedicate more time to practice it thoroughly. Let's start. The consonant combination NG is pronounced like the final sound in bring or thing. You don't hear the G, but you press the back of the tongue to the roof of the mouth, and the sound leaves through the nose, not through the mouth. That's why it's called nasal. If you're not used to nasal sounds, you might run into two issues. The first one is to pronounce this sound as a simple N. Let's take the German word bringen as an example. It would sound like brinnen, but that's wrong. To correct this, pay attention to the position of the tongue. When you say N, the tip of the tongue is behind the top teeth. But in order to make the sound, it needs to be behind the bottom teeth, and the back of the tongue touches the top of the mouth, not the front of the tongue. Here we can see it again. The second issue is making a g sound, but it's important to avoid that. It's not bringen or bringen, but bringen. In order to practice this, make a long ng sound and then pronounce the suffix, oppressing the urge to say g. Bringen. Bringen. In German, the ng is nearly always pronounced ng without a g. Exceptions are only some words of foreign origin. In English, it's not so consistent, and that might be a reason why English speakers have some difficulties with this sound. You know, on the one hand, you say bringing and singing without g, but on the other hand, you say finger and hunger with g. So, as I said, in German, it's important to avoid the g sound. Alright, let's practice some German words, and we'll start with the ng at the end of the word. Repeat after me. Jung, jung. Lang, lang. Ring, ring. Wohnung, Wohnung. Zeitung, Zeitung. And here are some German words with the ng sound in the middle of the word. And as I said, it's important to avoid pronouncing the g or g. Singen, singen. Hunger, Hunger. Finger, Finger. Zunge, Zunge. Langsam, langsam. Alright, that's how you pronounce the German nasal sound n. I'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, I'd like to talk about the letter combination QU. It also exists in English, but in German the pronunciation is very different. So, when you see this combination in German, you do not pronounce it like Q, but Kv. Kv. Let's have a look at some words. First, with QU at the beginning. Repeat after me. Quelle. Quelle. Quadrat. Quadrat. Qualität. Qualität. Quittung. Quittung. Quatsch. Quatsch. And here are some words with QU in the middle. As always, feel free to repeat after me. Bequem. Bequem. Frequenz. Frequenz. Aquarium. Aquarium. Äquator. Äquator. Zerquetschen. Zerquetschen. Alright, now you know how to pronounce the combination QU in German words. The R is one of the most varied German consonants, not only because of the regional differences, but also because of the different ways of pronouncing it. I mentioned in one of the previous lessons that more often than not, the German R sounds like a short namely when it's preceded by a vowel. In this lesson, I'll focus on the R as a consonant. Broadly speaking, you can divide Germany into two parts regarding the pronunciation of the R. In the north, it's pronounced like a French r, a sound that you make in the back of the mouth. And in the south, you pronounce it like a Spanish r, a sound that you make with the tip of your tongue. I'm from the south of Germany, so that's how I pronounce the R. I roll it. But let's start with the R that you make in the back of the mouth, the one that sounds French. In order to practice, you could take a glass of water and gargle. That's basically how the sound is produced. Then you continue without the water, and it sounds like this. Okay? So that's the first way of pronouncing the R in German. The second way is rolling it. Use your tongue now and feel behind your top teeth, where they meet your gums. To make the second R sound in German, we hit this spot with our tongues quickly. Let's try something. Make the sound D in English. D. Do you feel where the tongue starts? Right behind the top teeth. D. D. So what we are doing in German to make the rolling R is just hitting that spot very quickly. And the best way to learn how to make this sound is to say the English word buddy progressively faster. When we say buddy over and over again, faster and faster and faster, eventually the D won't sound like a D, but like a rolling R. Buddy, 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 buddy. Try it now. Alright, and now let's have a look at some German words that include the German R as a consonant. Listen and repeat. And by the way, as I said, I roll my R's, but please feel free to pronounce them in the French way in the back of the mouth, if that's easier for you. Brot. Brot. Grün. Grün. Reis. Reis. Straße, Straße. Schreiben, schreiben. Okay, let's summarize. There are two main ways of making the German R sound. Either in the back of your mouth, and that sounds like gargling water, r, or rolling it with the tip of your tongue, r. If you're not used to these sounds, use the tips in this lesson to drill them many times, over and over. And eventually they will come out naturally. But don't worry. As I said, there is a huge variety of dialects and different pronunciations all over the German-speaking countries, so we will understand you no matter which pronunciation you choose. The German S can be pronounced in two different ways, and its pronunciation depends on the position in the word. The rules are pretty simple, but important. Let's have a look. When the S comes before a vowel, it's pronounced Z, like the Z in zoo. In any other position, the S is pronounced S, like the S in sun. Double S and the so-called sharp S, or SZ, are also pronounced like S in sun. Here are some words with S in the initial position. Repeat after me. Sonne, Sonne. Sache, Sache. Suppe, Suppe. Seit, Seit. Singen, Singen. You can see that all these words are pronounced with Z as the S is followed by a vowel. Now let's have a look at some words with the voiceless S sound. Reis, Reis. Los, Los. Hässlich, hässlich. Füße, Füße. Ist, ist. Alright, next I'd like to show you word pairs with the two different ways of pronouncing the German S. The words are very similar, but this is helpful to understand when which sound is made and why. Let's go, and as always, please feel free to repeat after me. Risse, Riese. Wissen, Wiese. Reißen, Reisen. Wasser, Vase. Weißen, Weisen. As you can see, in the words on the left side, there is either a double S or a sharp S. That's why these words are pronounced with S. And on the right side, there is always a vowel after the S, so it's pronounced like Z. Alright, now you know how to pronounce the different S sounds in German. I'll see you in the next lesson. Hello and welcome to this lesson about the consonant combinations SP and ST. In Standard German, at the beginning of a word, SP is pronounced like SP, imagine ship without the I, and ST is pronounced ST, like shot without the O. Let's have a look at some examples. Repeat after me. Spiel, Spiel. Straße, Straße. Sport, Sport. Sturm, Sturm. Spaß, Spaß. Alright, that was at the beginning of a word. The same happens in the middle of a word when the SP or ST start a syllable. Repeat after me. Abstand, Abstand. Beispiel, Beispiel. Versprechen, Versprechen. Hauptstadt, Hauptstadt. Ballspiel, Ballspiel. Just to make it a bit clearer what I mean by saying at the start of a syllable, I'll show you the syllables of the words we just saw. Abstand, Beispiel. Versprechen. Hauptstadt. Ballspiel. Okay, now when the SP and ST are at the end of a word, or when they don't start a syllable, what I mean is when the S and P or T belong to two different syllables, they're pronounced as they would be in English. Let's check out some examples. Wespe, Wespe. Liste, Liste. Gast, Gast. Lustig, lustig. Haustier, Haustier. Again, I'm going to split these words into syllables so you can see that the S and P or T do not belong to the same syllable and therefore need to be pronounced without the sh sound. Wespe, Liste. Gast. At the end it's always without sh. Lustig. Haustier. Alright? So let's summarize. At the beginning of words, SP and ST always sound like sp or st. The same happens when they start a syllable inside a word. When they belong to separate syllables, they're pronounced without the sh sound. I know these rules might sound a bit confusing at first, but don't worry. The more words you learn, the more natural it's going to be, and you'll get a feeling for the right pronunciation. So for now, I'd like you to remember at least one thing, and that's number 1 here on the list. At the beginning of words, SP and ST always sound like sp or st. When I see the title of this lesson, I immediately think of Volkswagen, the German car, because the abbreviation is VW, or as we say in German, VW. So the topic of this lesson is how to pronounce the German V and W. The interesting thing is that there shouldn't be any problem for English speakers to make these sounds. They exist in both languages and they're exactly the same. What creates a lot of confusion is the German spelling. Let's see why. In most cases, the German letter V is pronounced in the same way as the English letter F in fish or find. So the difficulty doesn't come from the sound itself, but from seeing a letter that you're used to pronouncing V and remembering that in German you need to pronounce it as F. Here are some words to practice. Repeat after me. Vogel, Vogel. Vater, Vater. Vielleicht, vielleicht. 4, 4. Von, von. It requires a little practice to overcome the instinct to pronounce the V as V, but once you get used to it, it's pretty straightforward. Alright, I said that in most cases the German V is pronounced like an English F. This rule is only valid for words of Germanic origin. In loan words of Latin origin, the V is pronounced like in English. Here are some examples. Vase, Vase. Nervös, nervös. November, November. Visum, Visum. Universität, Universität. Okay, so that's the German letter V, or V as we call it. Now let's have a look at the letter W. And its name in German already shows us how we pronounce it. W. W. Alright? The German letter W is pronounced like in English V, in very or video. Let's practice. Wasser, Wasser. Wien, Wien. Wald, Wald. Bewegen, bewegen. Gewesen, gewesen. Now we'll move up a gear and use some examples that contain both the German V and W. Repeat after me. Verwaltung, Verwaltung. Wie viel? Wie viel? Volkswagen, Volkswagen. Vogelweide, Vogelweide. Vorwärts, vorwärts. Alright, let's summarize. The German V is pronounced like the English F in fish. In words of Latin origin, the V is pronounced the same as in English. And the German W is pronounced like the English V in very. Hello and welcome back. In this lesson, I'd like to talk about the German Z. English speakers shouldn't have a problem pronouncing it. It sounds like the combination of the letters T and S. Ts, ts. This sound is very common in English, especially at the end of words. For example, in let's, streets, or gets. So that should be okay, but I've noticed that a surprising number of people find it difficult to pronounce the German Z at the beginning of words. Now, I think this is rather a psychological barrier, because the sound exists, but the position is unfamiliar. So it can be overcome pretty easily. My tip is to practice the ts sound in familiar positions at the end of the word, concentrating on feeling how it's formed. And then carry the very same sound to the beginning of a German word. Let's practice. And by the way, what looks like a 2 at the end of the words is actually a Z. It's just the font. Netz, Netz. Herz, Herz. Salz, Salz. Alright, and now we carry this ts sound from the end to the beginning of a word. Zoo, Zoo. Zug, Zug. Zelt, Zelt. Zeit, Zeit. Zimmer, Zimmer. Very good. So we've seen the German Z at the end of words, at the start, and it also exists in the middle of words. Let's have a look at some examples. And by the way, when you have the combination T and Z, the pronunciation is exactly the same as a standalone Z. Ts. Repeat after me. Setzen. Setzen. Katze. Katze. Weizen. Weizen. Witze. Witze. Alright, so that's the German Z. To summarize, it's pronounced in the same manner as the English TS, ts, at the end of words such as gets or lets. I called this lesson Resist the Temptation because many English speakers tend to pronounce the German Z like the English Z, especially at the beginning of words. For example, so instead of zo or Zug instead of Zug. But that's not correct. The German Z is always pronounced ts. So resist the temptation and you're all set. In this lesson, we're going to practice the long and the short ä, one of the 3 umlaut letters in German. Let's start with the long ä. Usually when it's long, it's pronounced exactly the same as the long e that we've seen in previous lessons, for example in See and Meer. Here are the rules when to make this sound long. First, when there is one consonant after the ä, as in Käse. When there's an H after the ä, as in ähnlich. And when there is a sharp S after the ä, as in Gesäß. Let's practice. Repeat after me. Bär, Bär. Käfer, Käfer. Nähe, Nähe. Mäßig, mäßig. Wählen, wählen. And now let's have a look at the short ä, which is very similar to the short ä sound that we already know, the one that sounds like the ä in get. Ä. We pronounce it in this short way when it's followed by 2 consonants and especially double consonants, as in hätte. Here are more examples. Repeat after me. Äpfel, Äpfel. Männer, Männer. Hände, Hände. Kämmen, Kämmen. Ärger, Ärger. Alright, now you know how to pronounce the long and short ä. And as you could see, it doesn't really have a sound of its own, but it sounds either like the short or the long e that we already know. The other umlaut sounds, ö and ü, are of course different, and in the next lessons we'll have a closer look at those. Hi and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to practice the long and the short German ö, our second umlaut. Let's start with the long ö, and I'll show you a trick how to get it right. You make the long e as in See or Meer. The tip of your tongue touches the lower front teeth, and then you keep your tongue in that position and round your lips. This movement of the lips will create the Ö sound. E, Ö. I repeat. I start with E and then I round the lips, like a kiss. E, Ö. E, Ö. Feel free to look in the mirror to make sure that your lips are really rounded and in kiss position. Alright, and here are the rules when to make this sound long. First, when there is one consonant after the Ö, as in öl. When there is an H after the Ö, as in höhle. And when there is a sharp S after the Ö, as in klöße. Let's practice. Repeat after me. Schön. Schön. Größe. Größe. Söhne. Söhne. Mögen. Mögen. Öfen. Öfen. And now let's have a look at the short Ö, which is not simply a shorter version of the Ö sound, but the mouth is more relaxed and the lips are not so round. It's actually quite similar to the Ö sound in the English words herd or bird, with a British pronunciation and a silent R. Herd, bird, Ö, Ö. We pronounce the Ö in this short way when it's followed by two consonants, and especially double consonants, as in öffnen. Here are more examples. Repeat after me. Möchte. Möchte. Können. Können. Köpfe. Köpfe. Löffel. Löffel. Köstlich. Köstlich. Alright, let's keep practicing with word pairs to see the difference between the long Ö and the short Ö. Lösen, löschen. Höhle, Hölle. Trösten, rösten. Stören, störrisch. Goethe, Götter. Alright, now you know how to pronounce the long and short Ö. Don't worry if you still find it difficult to make this sound, the correct pronunciation will come with repeated practice. In this lesson we're going to practice the long and the short German Ü, our third and last umlaut. Let's start with the long Ü, and here again I'll show you a trick how to get it right. You make the long I as in hier or Bier. The tip of your tongue touches the lower front teeth, and then you keep your tongue in that position and round your lips. This movement of the lips will create the Ü sound. I'll show you. I, I. And And as we did for the Ö, feel free to look in the mirror to make sure that your lips are really rounded and in kiss position. Alright, and here are the rules when to make this sound long. First, always when it's stressed in a word. When there is one consonant after the Ü, as in über. When there is an H after the Ü, as in Gefühl. And when there is a sharp S after the Ü, as in Grüße. Let's practice. Repeat after me. Bücher, Bücher. Müde, müde. Süß, süß. Wüste, Wüste. Fühlen, fühlen. And now let's have a look at the short Ü. The mouth shape and tongue position are the same as for the long Ü, but this time the sound you make is shorter. We pronounce the Ü in this short way when it's followed by two consonants and especially double consonants, as in Hütte. Here are more examples. Repeat after me. Lücke, Lücke. Nüsse, Nüsse. Füttern, füttern. Müssen, müssen. Füllen, füllen. Alright, let's keep practicing with similar word pairs to see the difference between the long Ü and the short Ü. Wüste, Wüste. Düne, dünne. Mühle, Müll. Grün, Gründe. Hüte, Hütte. Okay, now I'd like to add another exercise, because Ü and Ö can sound very similar, especially when you're not used to the different sounds. So here are some word pairs to show you the difference. Let's start with the short Ö and Ü sounds. Hölle, Hülle. Knöpfen, Knüpfen. Stöcke, Stücke. Köche, Küche. Röcke, Rücke. And here is a comparison of the long Ö and Ü sounds. Töte, Tüte. Schwöre, schwüre. Zöge, Züge. Söhne, Sühne. Flöge, Flüge. Alright, now you know how to pronounce the long and short Ö as well as the long and short Ü. As I said before, don't worry if you find it difficult to make these sounds. The correct pronunciation will come with repeated practice. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about the German letter Y. This letter is interesting because, first of all, it's called Y, We took that name from Greek. The second reason is that, as the name indicates, its pronunciation is identical to the long Ü when it's in the middle of words. Only when it stands at the beginning or the end of a word, it's pronounced in the same way as in English, a short I. Let's have a look at some examples, and please feel free to repeat after me. Typisch, typisch. Pyramide, Pyramide. Asyl, Asyl. Synonym, Synonym. Dynamit, Dynamit. And here are some words that start or end with Y, and therefore the letter is pronounced as a short I. These are not words of German origin, but mostly loan words from English, but pronounced with a German accent. Listen and repeat. Baby, Baby. Handy, Handy. Party, Party. Yoga, Yoga. Yacht, Yacht. Alright, so let's summarize. In the middle of a word, Y is pronounced like a long Ü. And if a word starts or ends with a Y, it's pronounced I, as in English. Hello and welcome back. In addition to the normal vowels, German also has 3 diphthongs. Now, a diphthong is a combination of 2 vowel sounds within the same syllable. And in this lesson, I'm going to talk about the I diphthong. There is an equivalent in English, and you can find it in words such as light. It starts with an A sound, as in father, and then glides into an E sound, as in bit, but very fast. I. The I diphthong in German can be written with these vowel combinations. All of them are pronounced I. It's never A. Another characteristic of the diphthongs in German is that the stress is on the first vowel. For example, frei is never pronounced frei. Let's have a look at some words with this diphthong. Listen and repeat. Sein, sein. Eimer, Eimer. Bayern, Bayern. Hai, Hai. Meier, Meier. I can tell you that the vast majority of words that include this I diphthong are spelled with EI. The other combinations are pretty rare. Here are some more words with this diphthong. Kleid, Kleid. Preis, Preis. Eisen, Eisen. Bäckerei, Bäckerei. Zwei, zwei. There is another vowel combination that I mentioned earlier in the course, and I'm talking about the IE, which is pronounced like a long E. It's not a diphthong because you make only one sound, E. But as the spelling is very similar, many students get a bit confused. I'll show you some word pairs where one includes the diphthong I and the other the long E. Feel free to repeat after me. Wein, Wien. Steil, Stiel. Leid, Lied. Alright, now you know how to spell and pronounce the German diphthong I. In the next lesson we're going to learn about the other two diphthongs. I'll see you there. In the last video we learned about the German diphthong I, and as promised we're going to have a look at the other two German diphthongs in this video. Let's start with the Au diphthong. There is an equivalent in English and you can find it in words such as brown. It starts with an A sound as in father and then glides into an U sound as in look. But the transition is very fast. Au, au. The Au diphthong in German is always spelled AU, au. And as with the I diphthong, the stress is always on the first vowel. For example, Frau is never pronounced Frau. Okay, let's have a look at some words with this sound. Listen and repeat. Auge, Auge. Haus, Haus. Kaufen, kaufen. Genau, genau. Blau, blau. Alright, let's move on to the third and last diphthong, oi. The corresponding English sound can be found in the word boy. It starts with an O sound, as in not, and then glides into an E sound, as in lip. And again, the transition is very fast. Oi, oi. The oi diphthong can be spelled EU or EU. Both combinations are pronounced in the same way. Oi. Here are some words that contain this diphthong. Please feel free to repeat after me. Deutsch, Deutsch. Leute, Leute. Läuft, läuft. Häufig, häufig. Euro, Euro. Many learners pronounce this last word as Euro, but that's wrong. In German we pronounce the European currency as Euro. It starts with the same sound as the English word oyster. Euro. Alright, let's compare the two diphthongs to highlight the differences and also to make sure that we get the pronunciation right. Repeat after me. Laus, Läuse. Maus, Mäuse. Haus, Häuser. Baum, Bäume. Augen, Eugen. That's it. Now you know how to spell and pronounce the German diphthongs au and oi. Congratulations on finishing the German pronunciation masterclass. I hope that you enjoyed the lessons, and I'm confident that by now you've made a huge leap towards speaking German like a native. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. I wish you all the best on your ongoing language learning journey and would be happy to welcome you to one of my other courses. Good luck and auf Wiedersehen!